we've been considering awake, perceptual, and cognitive behaviors. For example, seeing, hearing, and what pathways or structures might underlie perception in the human brain. We've also looked at motor behavior, how we act in the world, and even looked at emotional behavior and saw how important emotions are in helping to guide us in making rational decisions. Note, however, that in all of our discussions, we have avoided addressing what it means to be awake and what it means to be conscious. In the next lecture, we're going to examine the current ideas and the problems that are faced by philosophers, neuroscientists, anyone who's interested in understanding the conscious state. In the present lecture, however, we're going to touch just a little bit on what neuroscience is contributing to our understanding of an altered state of consciousness that we all experience every day, and that's sleeping and dreaming. It turned out that this was a lot more difficult than it first looked. So, for example, there are complex interactions between many areas of the brain that are all the way from spinal cord up into the forebrain. It wasn't so simple that there's one nucleus that gets turned on and that's why we're awake, and then it gets inhibited and we go to sleep. We wish it had been that easy. Unfortunately, it is very difficult. But the one thing which is very important, and I want you to take away from this lecture, we aren't going to focus a lot on detailed anatomy. We're going to talk about generalities. But I want you to know that both wakefulness and sleep are actively induced and maintained by particular areas of the brain. So let's just think a little bit in some really general terms about the brain right now and brain areas that play a critical role. And we aren't going to focus so much on the details. Two major areas play a role in wakefulness, sleeping, and dreaming. One is the reticular formation. And you remember the reticular formation consists of 110 different nuclei that exist all the way from the lower parts of the brain up into the forebrain. Well, there's specific nuclei within the reticular formation, not all of them, but specific nuclei in the reticular formation that play a role in our ability to be awake or to sleep or play a role in dreaming. So the reticular formation is one of those brain areas which we know plays a critical role in these processes. Now, these neural groups in the reticular formation are themselves controlled by the hypothalamus. So you remember that the hypothalamus was below our thalamus, so it's located right about here. And our hypothalamus maintains a sort of homeostasis. And so if you think about it, between the waking and the sleeping state and everything, this is a sort of homeostatic mechanisms are involved in the control of this. Also, it's true that the light-dark cycle regulation of sleep and wakefulness is also controlled by the hypothalamus. So, for example, there's one nucleus here in the hypothalamus, which is called the suprachiasmatic, which means it's above a structure called the chiasm. It's just where optic fibers cross in the brain. It receives a direct projection from the eye. So the suprachiasmatic nucleus, it makes sense. It gets a direct projection from the retina. It's involved in circadian rhythms. And the word circadian is from the Latin, meaning around a day. So we have our day-night cycle synced with a light-dark cycle. And so this is one of the nuclei in the hypothalamus that's involved in this. And it knows when it's light outside because it gets input from the retina, so it gets input from the eyeball. And this is also, when we talk about sleeping and dreaming and these sorts of things, where Descartes' famous pineal comes in. It turns out that the pineal actually produces melatonin, which is one of the hormones that's involved in sleep-wake cycles. And so it actually isn't the seat of the rational mind or the soul, but it does play an important role in our lives. All of these nuclei in the reticular formation, in the hypothalamus, and other areas of the brain are involved as well, are involved in very, very complex circuits that are going to control wakefulness, sleep, and dreaming, and the switching between those various states. So again, we're back. what is the most important thing I want you to take away from this lecture is that both wakefulness and sleep are actively induced and maintained by the brain. I don't think any of you are surprised at that at this point in knowing that whatever happens is going to be regulated by the brain. Now, before we discuss any of the sort of general mechanisms that are involved in dreaming or sleeping, we need to discuss how we study these things experimentally. It turns out that there are changes in brain activity that can actually be measured. So they place electrodes on the skull, and you can actually measure like sort of a population response of neurons beneath that. And this is the electroencephalogram. So what it measures are global changes in electrical activity in the brain. So now we're not looking at specific areas that light up when you're making a decision or something. We're looking at a very big and global process. So let's look at this and see what it looks like under different conditions of wakefulness and sleeping. So what does it look like in the awake state? Well, if you look here on this diagram, you see this is awake with eyes open. The EEG, or the recording from these electrodes, shows a low voltage, desynchronized, fast activity. So if you look at the electrical activity of the brain in general, this is what it looks like. Now, sleep actually occurs in stages. So it doesn't happen all at once. It occurs in stages. And those stages are actually associated with changes in the EEG. So during about the first hour or so of sleep, there's a progressive slowing and synchronization of this EEG activity. And for this reason, it is called slow wave sleep. And in fact, slow wave sleep actually progresses through 4 stages. And just to make this so it's not so busy, I've shown stage 1 and stage 4. And what you can see here is that by stage 4, you have EEG activity, which is slow, highly synchronized, and high voltage. So if you look here at stage 4 sleep, how different that looks from the awake EEG. And this is how we investigate this in the laboratory. Now, during slow wave sleep, this very synchronized, very high voltage synchronized activity, we actually have a decrease in heart rate, in our blood pressure, in our respiration. And that means that there's a parasympathetic dominance. So parasympathetic, this is part of the autonomic nervous system controlled by the hypothalamus that's involved in rest and relaxation. And so during the slow wave sleep, this is the system that is working, which is maximal during this time. If you awaken an individual during slow wave sleep, generally they do not recall any kind of dream. And so this is another way that slow wave sleep will be different from other stages of sleep. Then over about a 30-minute period, at the end of stage 4 slow wave sleep, what happens, and this is about 90 minutes into the evening, or your first cycle of this anyway, there's an episode of what is referred to as rapid eye movement sleep. And rapid eye movement sleep, shown here again on our EEG pattern, this is a deeper level of sleep. Now what's interesting, look at this, look at REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, and look at the normal EEG. And what you see is that rapid eye movement sleep is very similar in its EEG pattern to the awake state. And for that reason, it's called paradoxical sleep. It's actually the deepest level of sleep you can be in. The arousal threshold is higher. It's harder to awaken people from it. It's the deepest level of sleep, and yet the EEG looks like you're awake. So it's called paradoxical sleep. During rapid eye movement sleep, you have increased oxygen consumption, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, and increased respiration. So this is where you have what's called a sympathetic dominance. So it's your fight or flight. So it's the part of the autonomic nervous system that wants to prepare you to fight. So here your EEG activity looks like you're awake, you're in this kind of state, and actually the consumption of oxygen by the brain is greater during REM sleep than it is during either intense physical or mental exercise. So the brain is very, very active. Now, over the course of a night, there may be 5 to 7 of these cycles of both slow wave sleep, REM sleep, and then back to slow wave sleep and REM sleep again. So you have 5 to 7 cycles a night. And there's sort of a progression as the night goes on. The slow wave sleep becomes less deep, and the REM episodes increase in length. So there's a change during the night of these cycles, but you normally have 5 to 7 of such cycles a night. Also, over a lifetime, the amount of time slept and in various stages of sleep changes. So, for example, when we're babies, we sleep about 18 hours a day. And unfortunately for our parents, the only time we're awake is when they're trying to sleep. But we sleep about 18 hours a day, and as we age, we progressively spend less total number of hours asleep. Or this is, these are averages we're talking about. There are also changes in REM sleep as we age. Listen carefully. In humans, REM sleep begins in utero. So fetuses actually have REM episodes. And in young infants, it comprises about 50% of their total sleep time. Then it diminishes to about 20% during puberty. And from that point on is relatively stable until advanced age when it goes down again. So there are changes in the amount of sleep, in the way we sleep, and in particular stages like REM, both developmentally and in other ways as we age. You know, at about this point in our course, you really have to stop and imagine all of this going on in your brain. We can walk and talk and think and listen to things. We can smile. We can interact. We can do all kinds of things. And all these processes are being controlled in our brain. The fact I'm awake right now is because there are nuclei in my reticular formation that are causing me to be awake and causing me to be conscious. And without that, I wouldn't even be able to be here in front of you. And so at this point, we understand all of this is going on without our having to do anything. So this is just, I think, really fantastic. So how does the brain control all these various stages and everything? What do we know about it? Well, the complexity of these circuits, I had to make sort of a decision about this. The complexity of these circuits that involve both waking, sleeping, and switching between the states is incredibly complex. It's astounding, actually. I counted no less than 10 separate nuclei and 6 separate neurotransmitters that are involved in a single stage of sleep. And you can only imagine, those are only the ones that we know about. These are only the ones we've discovered. So rather than covering all of them, I sort of made an executive decision. And that is that I don't want to go into details about any one of them or whatever. I want to basically summarize for you what we believe is going on, because I think that's more important than whether you hear a lot of the details of the anatomy. So I try to draw a picture here for you that sort of summarizes overall what we've learned about sleeping and dreaming and the regulation of these states. There appear to be 2 general systems that are regulating these states. One system here, which is shown in red, involves nuclei that are primarily at the pons midbrain junction. And there's a second system which is involved, a number of nuclei are involved here, in the pons and the medulla and other areas that project up to the cortex. Both of these systems, in fact, either project directly to the cortex or project to the thalamus, which then projects to the cortex. So think of just 2 major systems. This second system, which is down here, the one shown in black, primarily utilizes monoamines as neurotransmitters. And we're going to come back to that little fact. It's not something you would remember unless I pointed it out. So I want you to just think of two general systems that are involved. And each of these may be multiple nuclei that are involved in multiple neurotransmitters. Now, just think in terms of these two systems. During wakefulness, so while we're awake right now, both of these systems are active. Both are stimulating the cortex and or the thalamus in the cortex, so they're both active. During slow wave sleep, they both show a decrease in responsiveness. So there's a decrease in activity in both of the systems during slow wave sleep. And we also call slow wave sleep non-REM sleep. During REM sleep, the red system is extremely active and the black system is completely turned off. So we have two general systems that can be differentiated in what they do during wakefulness, non-REM sleep or slow wave sleep, and REM sleep. So think of it more in those terms. I think that would be much better for you to remember than the details of any one of the systems. So what about dreaming? Dreaming is really interesting, but we know even less about what mechanisms in the brain control dreaming. We do know that it's controlled predominantly by reticular formation. We do know this from lesions in individuals who had various types of brain damage and everything. We also know that all neurologically normal individuals do in fact dream every night and dream multiple times. Not everyone recalls their dreams, but everyone does dream. People can have REM rebound or dream rebound if they're deprived of sleep. So most dreaming, we believe, takes place during REM episodes. And we'll come back to that because it isn't true that all dreaming takes place during that time. So actually, contrary to popular belief, and that is that all episodes that involve dreaming take place during REM, we also know that there is dreaming associated with slow wave sleep or non-REM sleep. But it turns out in slow wave sleep or REM sleep, recall is different and the content of the dream is different. So that's very interesting. So let's look at dream content first. During slow wave sleep, if you're awakened during a time when you're dreaming, there's no story. There's no story to what you remember. Very poorly recalled, like a single event. But if you're awakened during REM sleep, you can tell complex stories. So your REM episodes have some kind of storyline associated with them. It can be very complex. There's very vivid imagery that takes place during REM episodes or during REM sleep, and REM dreams are often recalled. So in addition to increased dream recall that you have during REM over the course of a night, there's also an increased intensity to the REM episodes, or the dreaming that occurs in REM. And your most intense dreams take place in the early morning hours. We don't know what controls this because we're just learning about what's going on in the brain, but it is very interesting. Also, bad dreams can occur during REM, and I'm calling them bad dreams, meaning that they're complicated stories that have a negative sort of connotation. So we call them bad dreams, and these also take place during REM. The dreams, again, that take place during non-REM sleep, or what we call slow wave sleep, are poorly recalled, and the dream content is generally less visual and less emotional. Now, we said this before, bad dreams can occur during REM sleep, but actually true nightmares are seen only during slow wave sleep. And again, this is something else that individuals who work in this area are very, very interested in. When you have nightmares, these occur during slow wave sleep. So let's talk a little bit about that. Such dreams that occur during non-REM sleep or the slow wave sleep are true nightmares, and they have respiratory oppression. The individual has difficulty breathing, and the person can be almost completely paralyzed during these episodes. So these are true nightmares. In children, the non-REM nightmares are called pavor nocturnus, which means night terrors. These episodes might last only 1 minute, and there may be no recall of it when the child awakens. The child may awaken by simply screaming in terror, but when asked what the problem is, they can't recall anything because remember, during slow wave sleep, there's very little visual imagery or anything that could be recalled. In adults who have nightmares during slow wave sleep, it's called incubus, and that means demon or evil spirit. So it was thought that these demons descended on these individuals who had these periods, who had these terrible nightmares. There can usually be no memory of the dream. If there is any recall of these episodes, which are generally short, there's no story involved. It's just a single horrifying event. And there are actually individuals who have damage to their brain and end up having pavor nocturnus or incubus as adults. And this can be terrible for the person's even desire to want to sleep because they don't want to go to sleep. They can't recall a story, but they don't want to go to sleep, which says that the brain is retaining some kind of memory of this horrifying nightmare which has taken place. And all of us have this sort of dream weaver that's weaving our dreams for us anyway. And we'll come back to a little bit about, in neurologically normal individuals, how important dreams really are. Sleep disorders, as everyone knows, are fairly common in our culture. And they can involve something like insomnia, where a person can't go to sleep at night. They can involve other problems like not being able to stay asleep once you've gone to sleep. That could be terrible. People wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning and can't go back to sleep. Or individuals suffer from what we call somnolence, which is a sleepiness during the day. So they're sleepy all day long and they just can't ever seem to be fully awake and tend to drink a lot of coffee. One of the best studied of the sleep disorders is narcolepsy. And narcolepsy is a genetic disorder, a sleep disorder, which consists of episodes where an individual will suddenly become very sleepy or fall asleep during the day. So the individual can't help it. They can't inhibit it. They'll be carrying on a conversation and they'll suddenly just go to sleep. So they have these attacks during the day. Individuals with this disorder typically have difficulty sleeping at night. So that led us to think that there was probably some problem in whatever nuclei in the brain controlled the switching from the one state to the other. And there have been found problems in this switching mechanism. The first attack when people have narcolepsy doesn't generally occur until puberty to the mid-20s. So the individual may not have any of these attacks until that time. Now this is interesting because notice that this is a time when the regulation of REM also changes. This is when it goes from about 50% of total sleep down to 20%. So these individuals also have something wrong with the nuclei or connections that control REM episodes. And in fact, what you see in individuals with narcolepsy, when they go to sleep suddenly, in the middle of the day, they go directly to REM. So they don't go through all those other stages of sleep. They suddenly go into a REM episode. And in fact, there are individuals with this disorder who have REM episodes while they're awake. And they have difficulty because they have like hallucinatory events that are taking place while they're awake because they're having this dream state occur while they're actually awake and not asleep. So individuals with this disorder also often have another disorder which is comorbid with it, which means they often occur together. And that is a disorder called cataplexy. And cataplexy is where there's a sudden loss of muscle tone in the individual. that's brought about by emotion. So the individual, you tell them a joke and they start laughing and suddenly they lose all their muscle tone and they may collapse, or they may only be slack-jawed, for example, something like that. But they will lose muscle tone either in the whole body or in part of their body. And these two disorders often exist in the same person and happen together. Now, these cataplectic episodes can occur when a person is about to have an episode where they fall asleep. So it can be when they go into one of those episodes, when they come out of it. It doesn't take much to realize that this is a debilitating disorder. So you have an individual who, it's very dangerous for one thing, because this person suddenly falls asleep, can't control it. I knew someone when I was in college who had this disorder. You could fall, you could hit your head, you could have a bleed in the brain, you could die. So it's a very dangerous disorder. Not to mention, if you also have cataplexy, it can interfere greatly with social interaction. Both narcolepsy and cataplexy can. You're talking to an individual and you're in the middle of a conversation, suddenly this person goes to sleep, or suddenly this person's jaw falls open because they lose muscle tone. This changes the way this person is able to interact with other human beings in their environment. And so while it isn't a disorder that will kill you, it certainly is one that does interfere with your ability to live a normal life. One gene locus has been identified, and this gene is believed to be one that controls the switching mechanisms between the awake state to the sleep state to REM sleep. And so it is the switching mechanism in particular that is off. Now, narcolepsy can't be cured, but it can be treated. And I thought you might find at this point in the course it's kind of interesting how it's treated. The attacks where the person suddenly falls asleep, well, it makes sense. It's treated with stimulants. You treat it with prescription-level stimulants to try to keep the person awake. And it operates on these areas of the brain, and that's why stimulants work. The difficulty with REM sleep that they have these REM episodes while they're awake, or when they have a narcoleptic attack, they go directly to REM. That's treated with tricyclic antidepressants, or MAO inhibitors. Remember when we talked about not calling a drug an antidepressant or something? What mattered was its mechanism of action. Well, it turns out that that one system, which is basically turned off during REM in normal individuals, is the system that uses monoamines. So in order to, the individual with narcolepsy, of course, doesn't have that system working correctly. So what you want to do is increase the monoamines so they have fewer REM episodes. And so they give them tricyclics that increase their level of monoamines. But they're the same drugs that would be given to a person who had depression. And so again, it's the mechanism of action that matters in any drug you take or anyone prescribes for you, which is the most important thing. Now, sleep research is very important. It's a very active area of research. We spend about a third of our lives asleep. And this in itself says that something important has to be going on, and yet we don't have any idea why we need to sleep or why we need to dream. We really don't have any idea. So dreaming in particular is something that captivates our imagination. You know, there are cultures who've always thought that it gives you foreknowledge of the future, that it can portend things, that this is very important, give us insight into our desires and our secret wishes. Freud thought it gave us a peek into the subconscious of what was going on in our minds. And certainly, maybe all of this is true on some level. But we think that obviously there's a reason. REM episodes start in utero. We know that that's true. We know something else. Only animals with neocortex have REM episodes. So these episodes where the storyline and the visual imagery and everything, all of this occurs only in animals that have a neocortex. And so there's something going on. There's something that's important. The only real line of evidence that is beginning to maybe give us a little insight into what sleep and dreaming are about is that it turns out that REM is necessary or thought to be involved in helping in the consolidation of memory. So while the hippocampus may take information involved in learning and memory, it looks like if you prevent REM episodes from happening, you prevent the consolidation into long-term memory. And so there's something about what's happening during those episodes that the brain needs to somehow transfer the information, that short-term buffer in the hippocampus, to more long-term storage or change in proteins. The other thing we think is very, very interesting is that for most of us, we may every once in a while have a dream in which we realize we're dreaming, but actually we can very readily tell the difference between dreaming and awake state. And in fact, but we have to be awake to be able to do that. So when we wake up in the morning after, getting the fog cleared out, we clearly can tell the difference between a dream state and a waking state. Well, cognitive neuroscientists are interested in this because they want to know what processes are going on during the awake state that allows for that self-reflection that tells us the one was real and the other is not. And so cognitive neuroscientists are very interested in wakefulness, sleeping, and dreaming. So in the next lecture, what we're going to look at is the enigma of the conscious state. And this is something that truly captivates philosophers, psychologists, and neuroscientists. Thank you.